What would you do if you found out your husband had an affair and now the woman carrying his child stood right in front of you? I stood frozen, facing Jasper's smug expression as the woman beside him flaunted her swollen belly. My heart pounded, the weight of betrayal crashing down. I had hoped this day would never come, but now it was undeniable. I stormed into the bedroom, grabbed the divorce papers, and handed them to him. "Sign it," I said coldly. "I'll file it tomorrow." Jasper looked at the papers, confused and embarrassed, but I didn't care. This was the end. A woman, visibly pregnant with her 9-month belly, stood in front of me, and I could barely stomach the thought of facing him. I was left with the overwhelming reality that I would raise this baby alone while constantly being reminded of her swollen belly. Jasper, however, looked at me with disdain, a smug expression playing on his face as if he had been waiting for this moment. Though I had known this would happen, the sting of it still hurt. Without hesitation, I stormed to my room and returned with divorce papers. I handed them to Jasper, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked at the papers in shock. "What's this all of a sudden?" "It was your idea," I replied coldly. "Just sign it quickly. I'll submit it tomorrow." His face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment as he processed my words. "Watch carefully," I warned him. "I'll make you regret how you've treated me and looked down on me." My name is Phoenix. I'm 27, and I've been a housewife for the past 2 years. I used to work at a mobile company, and that's where I met Jasper when I was 25. He was my boss, and we quickly grew close. What started as professional admiration turned into love, and a year later, we married. Jasper, 3 years older than me, had always been someone I could rely on, especially in my early career. His guidance was clear, and I appreciated it more than I could say. We became good friends, often going out for dinner and sharing moments outside of work. When he asked me out, I was elated. It felt like a dream come true, especially since I had never been in a relationship before. If I'm being honest, I'd always found more interest in cartoon characters than real men, so dating was never something I pursued. Watching my high school and college friends get married only added to the pressure I felt. When Jasper came into my life, I decided he would be my first and last love. So when we began dating and got married a year later, I was on cloud 9. Jasper was handsome and well-liked, especially by the women at work. I was proud to be his wife and relished the well wishes we received from everyone. It was a happy time, and I never imagined the challenges ahead. The day after we registered our marriage, I nervously asked Jasper, "Now that we're married, you expect me to quit my job, right?" His response caught me off guard. "I've always wanted my wife to focus solely on home matters. Don't worry about work. I can support us," he said. "But you never mentioned this before," I replied, trying to process his sudden request. We'd never talked about this before our marriage. I had taken the job based on my father's advice, and the idea of quitting without any discussion felt wrong. I wanted to explain myself, but Jasper's silent gaze stopped me in my tracks. "I should have told you earlier, but it's too late now," he said. "Starting tomorrow, you don't need to go to work. I'll handle the transition." The sudden news hit me hard, leaving me dizzy and overwhelmed. But Jasper's decision was final, and as my former boss, I didn't feel like I had any say. I left my job without a proper goodbye, committed to making our marriage work. I focused on household duties, trying my best to meet Jasper's expectations. I cooked his favorite meals, hoping for some recognition, but his silence made me long for even the smallest acknowledgement. I had sacrificed my career, but it felt like I was invisible in our marriage. One day I asked him, "Is my jacket clean? I have an important meeting tomorrow." "Yes, of course," he replied, showing his old-fashioned and commanding side. I reminded myself how lucky I was to be married to him and tried to meet his expectations. Without a personal income, I relied on Jasper for everything. Our relationship often felt more like a boss and an employee than a husband and wife, but overall our married life was relatively smooth. One day I fell ill and couldn't get out of bed. Feeling too weak to do housework, I planned to catch up on it the next day. Jasper came into the room looking angry and demanded, "What are you doing? Get up and make some food," while kicking the blanket off me. I explained, "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well." Instead of understanding, Jasper scowled and said, "You don't work and you're lying down just because you're a bit sick? Pathetic." I was shocked that he would insist on chores even when I was sick. I never expected him to be like this before we got married. Maybe I should have noticed, but it was too much. I ended up doing the chores while crying. A few days later, I realized I had missed my period and felt a rush of panic. I went to the drugstore and bought a pregnancy test, which turned out to be positive. Overjoyed, I cried tears of happiness and decided to tell Jasper as soon as he came home from work. That night, Jasper came home after midnight smelling strongly of alcohol and staggering as he walked. I was surprised at how drunk he was, especially since he hadn't warned me. Despite having prepared dinner and wanting to share my pregnancy news, I decided to tell him right away. My excitement got the best of me, and I shared the news with my tipsy husband. "I haven't seen a doctor yet, so it's not confirmed," I said, trying to share our exciting news, but Jasper's face turned dark as he replied, "A child! What have you done?" His tone was colder and more severe than I had ever heard. "I don't want a child. This is the worst. If you're going to have it, you'll have to take care of it yourself." His harsh words shocked me. He angrily undressed and went to the bathroom. I couldn't understand why he was being so irresponsible about our baby. The happiness I had felt moments ago was replaced with deep sadness. He had never said he didn't want children before. We hadn't been using contraception, so I assumed we both wanted a family. As I was hanging up Jasper's jacket and about to take his shirt to the laundry, I noticed something in the pocket. "What's this?" It was a piece of paper that felt like a receipt. At first, I thought it was from tonight's event and was about to throw it away, but then I saw the name of the place. "Is this a motel?" My hand shook as I realized it was indeed a motel receipt. This discovery shocked me deeply. I wondered why Jasper would behave this way. Marriage is supposed to be about love between two people, especially since we'd only been married for just over a year. I had spent years dreaming of romantic relationships but had never really experienced one. I couldn't immediately accept this painful truth, but the idea of cheating started to make sense. Were all my doubts about him using me as a servant while loving someone else true? Was this the reason he reacted so harshly to the news of my pregnancy? As I struggled with these troubling thoughts, an overwhelming wave of nausea hit me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. It started to click. Jasper had a mistress at my old workplace, and perhaps he had married me not out of love, but for the stability I provided. The more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to make sense, as if the line between reality and my imagination was beginning to blur. Still, I couldn't ignore the cruel things he had said when I told him about the pregnancy. Determined to uncover the truth, I began gathering proof of Jasper's infidelity. His cold demeanor towards me made it clear that he resented the pregnancy. Even though I was suffering from morning sickness, he would purposely eat strong-smelling foods around me, all while criticizing my housework and making me redo tasks. The strain on my body and heart was unbearable, but I was resolute. I had to find the truth. Jasper was possessive of his phone, never leaving it unattended, even taking it with him to the bathroom. Whenever I tried to sneak into his room, it was always impeccably tidy, with nothing out of place. At work, he was just as meticulous. His desk was always spotless. Catching him in the act seemed nearly impossible. I rummaged through his pockets for receipts or any hint of evidence, but each search came up empty. I thought about hiring a private detective, but I didn't have the funds for that. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, my phone rang. An unexpected call from my father, who rarely reached out to me. "Hello, it's Dad. How are you?" he asked, his voice steady. I was surprised to hear from him. He was always so busy. "Dad, what's going on? Aren't you swamped with work?" I replied, confused by his sudden call. "My employees have been handling things well. so I'm not as busy," he said. As the CEO of a company in Canada, my father had always been a workaholic. I didn't have many childhood memories of spending time with him, but I always respected his dedication. I wondered why he was calling now. "So, what's going on?" I asked, waiting for him to explain. What he said next left me stunned. "Is that really true?" I asked, trying to process the shocking news. "Yes, he's not the type to lie. I need you to trust me," my father reassured me, sensing my disbelief. I sat in silence, still shocked by what I had learned, but as I absorbed the information, a sense of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Dad. I'll do my best," I said, my voice steady with gratitude before ending the call. Finally, my investigation was yielding results, and while I felt a mix of relief and anger, the tension with Jasper continued to mount. Despite my pregnancy, his emotional distance only fueled my resentment toward him. Months passed and our relationship remained strained. Then everything shattered. As I neared my 9th month of pregnancy, I lived in constant fear, trying to avoid Jasper and leading a quiet, isolated life. One evening, as usual, I was serving dinner. Jasper came home and we sat down to eat, but as I quietly ate my meal, Jasper suddenly slammed his fork onto the table. "What is this? It's tasteless," he yelled, throwing the food I had carefully prepared onto the floor. I was shocked, unable to comprehend his sudden outburst. My frustration boiled as I watched my meal discarded without a second thought. Jasper complained that my cooking had become bland recently, but I had been trying to make healthier meals for both of us during my pregnancy. If he didn't like the taste, he could have added salt, but there was no need for him to throw it on the floor. Just as I was about to speak, Jasper sneered, his voice dripping with cruelty. "I don't want a woman with a belly like a monster. You'll have to raise the kid by yourself," he spat, a cruel smile twisting his face. I had feared this day might come, though I had hoped for a different outcome. Quickly, I went to my room, grabbed some documents, and returned to show them to Jasper. "Here are the divorce papers," I said, pushing the documents towards him. Jasper looked stunned and asked, "What the hell? What's this all of a sudden?" "Well, it was your idea. Just sign it quickly, I'll submit it tomorrow," I said. I had been thinking about divorce ever since I suspected Jasper's infidelity. With a baby on the way, I wasn't sure if I could manage on my own, but now I had a new plan. My determination seemed to anger Jasper. His face turned red with rage. "Just wait, I'll make you regret every moment you looked down on me and tried to control me. Do you think you can manage without me? You'll have a baby to care for and you'll regret it," he threatened. I stayed firm and unshaken. "I'll be fine, don't worry about me," I assured him. Maybe annoyed by my resolve, Jasper grabbed the divorce papers and started filling them out. "Here you go, if this is what you want, it's yours," he said. "Thank you," I replied. Jasper probably didn't think I would actually go through with it as he handed the papers over without much fuss. The next day, I submitted the divorce papers and left the house. I knew he'd be surprised when he came home from work to find me gone. After that, I moved to my parents' home. My father had returned to the U.S. from Canada and suggested I stay with them. It was the right choice for me as I was fed up with life with Jasper. I was deeply grateful to my father for his support. On the day I left our home, Jasper called me 3 times, but I ignored each one. Eventually, he stopped calling. It became clear that I meant very little to him. He was probably happy with his mistress and might even be planning to remarry. I decided to move on from Jasper. 6 months later, I had a baby who was born safely, and I was living happily with my parents. While enjoying this peaceful life, Jasper called me again. At first, I ignored his calls, but after he persisted, I had no choice but to answer. "Hello, what do you want now?" I asked, tired of his calls. "Hey, what's going on? Why were you on that show, and since when are you the daughter of a CEO with millions of dollars?" Jasper's voice was a mix of surprise and anger. It turned out he had seen a TV program about my family's lifestyle, which aired after I moved back to my parents' house. After returning to their home, I had been approached by a TV station, eager to feature my father, the CEO of a major global tech company. The show highlighted the luxurious lifestyle of CEO families, and they filmed at our house, discussing the wealth of our family, which was estimated at around $10 million. I never imagined Jasper would see the show, but television's reach was more powerful than I realized. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention that I inherited $40 million, which is why I was able to divorce you, I said nonchalantly. My father had told me about this inheritance, and it gave me the confidence to live freely, even after leaving Jasper. Jasper's reaction was immediate and furious. What? That's unfair. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Half of it is mine, right? Give me the money now. I remained calm, replying, just as I suspected, after seeing the show, all you're focused on is getting money from me. Gifts from parents don't count in property division, and don't forget your own actions. Jasper looked confused, asking, what are you talking about? I'm done with your anger, Jasper, I said, my voice firm. You called me. You should know by now you can't blame me for what you did. You cheated, didn't you? With your new wife, who's a junior at your company? You were seeing her before we were even married. Jasper's face went pale with shock as he realized I knew the truth. Finally, I had the upper hand. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I continued. My father has plenty of connections in your company. One of them told me about your affair. I haven't mentioned it until now, but I'll be demanding child support, I declared. Jasper, still in denial, tried to argue. Stop kidding. Why should I pay child support? It's your fault for getting pregnant alone and not keeping up with the housework. It's your fault. I was stunned. How could he still shift the blame and refuse to take responsibility for anything? I couldn't believe I had once been married to someone so unreasonable. It was clear I had made the right decision to leave him. Jasper, I'm broke. My wife spent all my money, and now I'm in debt, he lamented. But I wasn't moved by his pitiful pleas. His refusal to acknowledge his mistakes only fueled my anger. I had no intention of dealing with someone like him ever again. Gripping my phone tightly, I prepared to end the conversation. What are you even talking about? I snapped. Do you realize how ridiculous you sound? I never want to deal with you again. I'll have my lawyer handle the child support. Don't call me again, and you won't see the child anymore. Goodbye. I hung up quickly, my frustration boiling over. I blocked Jasper's number, took a deep breath, and felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was finally over. I had no intention of letting him disrupt my peace any longer. Just as I exhaled, I heard my baby crying from the other room, and I rushed to comfort them. As it turned out, Jasper started paying child support each month. A former colleague of mine told me that Jasper's new wife was a big spender, and he had ended up using debts to cover his living expenses. Apparently, he had hoped to get a share of my inheritance by reaching out to me, but since I didn't give him any money, he was now struggling with expenses that far exceeded his income. It seemed like his life was falling apart. He had only started looking for a new job after leaving his previous one, which only added to his financial troubles. Hearing all of this didn't evoke any sympathy in me. I felt like he got exactly what he deserved. His harsh words, cold behavior, and betrayal would never be forgotten. Meanwhile, I was living a peaceful life with my parents and my baby, free from financial worries. I felt excited about the future, especially since my father had mentioned passing on the company to me. I was ready to work hard and make the most of this new chapter in my life. But as the days went by, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end of everything? Was I simply walking away from a broken marriage? Or was I reclaiming my life from someone who never truly respected me? Looking back, it's hard not to feel a sense of pride in how far I've come. Jasper's refusal to take responsibility for his actions, his arrogance, and his utter lack of empathy all led to one undeniable truth. I had made the right decision. Walking away from him wasn't just about escaping a toxic relationship, it was about stepping into a future where I could regain control, heal, and build a better life for myself and my child. But here's the question: could I have made it work? Was there any hope left to salvage our marriage, or was I always destined to walk this path alone? I can't ignore the part of me that wonders if, somewhere deep down, I should have fought harder for the man I thought I loved. Could things have been different if I had just stayed a little longer? Or was this exactly what I needed to get out of a situation that would have only dragged me further down? But what about you? Do you believe in second chances? Or is there a point when enough is enough? If you were in my shoes, would you have walked away too? Let's talk about it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep following these stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I stood in the dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of lilies and sorrow. The wake of Harold, my father-in-law, was more a display of pretense than a tribute to his life. My husband Alex clasped my hand tightly, his eyes a well of unshed tears. Vivian, Alex's mother, approached us with a thinly veiled sneer. "Elaine, Alex," she began, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "This is a family matter. Outsiders like Elaine should keep their distance." I felt a sting in her words. 3 years of marriage to Alex, and still I was an outsider. Greg and Nora, Alex's siblings, stood behind Vivian, their expressions echoing her disdain. "What are you saying, Mother?" Alex's voice trembled. "Elaine is family." "Family?" Vivian scoffed. "A family doesn't scheme for inheritance. We all know Harold left behind a fortune. 2 million, wasn't it?" I bit back my anger. "We never cared about the money. It was always about Harold, his kind smile, his gentle words of encouragement." "Money? That's all you care about?" Alex's words were barely a whisper, but they cut through the tension like a knife. Greg chimed in, his tone laced with contempt. "Come on, Alex. Don't play the saint. We all know why she's here." Nora added with a smirk. "Yeah. Heard how cozy Elaine was getting with Dad? Planning to seduce your way to the inheritance?" Their accusations were like slaps to my face. Tears welled up, but I fought them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Enough!" Alex's outburst silenced the room. "We don't want your money. All we wanted was to say goodbye to a man we loved." Vivian's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Goodbye to a man you loved? Elaine, dear, were you in love with my husband?" The room spun. Their cruel words, their unjust accusations, it was unbearable. I turned to Alex, my heart breaking for him. His family's true colors were laid bare, their greed and malice exposed. "Let's leave, Alex," I whispered, pulling him away. "We don't belong here." As we walked away, Vivian's mocking voice followed us. "Run away, Elaine. Remember, outsiders have no place here." Outside, the cold night air felt like a balm. Alex wrapped his arm around me, his body trembling with suppressed sobs. "I'm so sorry, Elaine," he muttered. "I never wanted you to be hurt like this." I hugged him, feeling his pain, our shared grief. "It's not your fault, Alex. We did everything for Harold, not for them." We stood there, under the starless sky, united in our sorrow and betrayal. The pain of loss was deep, but deeper still was the wound inflicted by his own family. As we drove back home, a silent resolve settled between us. We would not let Vivian and her children's venom taint our memories of Harold. We would find a way to honor him, away from the shadows of greed and lies. The chapter closes as Elaine and Alex leave the wake, their hearts heavy, but determined to seek justice in their own way, setting the stage for the unfolding drama and revenge. The clock in our living room struck midnight as Alex and I sat in silence, the events of the wake replaying in our minds. I could see the hurt in Alex's eyes, a pain that went deeper than tonight's insults. "Remember when we first met, Elaine?" Alex's voice broke the silence. "At that college art show, you were so passionate about your photography." I smiled, recalling our simpler days. "And you lost in your sketches. We were worlds apart from all this," I gestured vaguely, encompassing the current turmoil. Alex leaned back, his gaze distant. "I never told you the whole story about my family, did I? About why I was always so distant from them." I reached for his hand, encouraging him to continue. This was a story I knew only in fragments. My mother, Vivian, always favored Greg and Nora. They could do no wrong in her eyes. Alex began, his voice laced with a bitterness I rarely heard from him. I was always the afterthought, the mistake. I squeezed his hand, feeling his old wounds reopen. When I was a kid, Vivian never came to my school events. Greg and Nora got all the new clothes, the latest gadgets. I got their hand-me-downs if I was lucky. His words painted a picture of neglect, of a childhood shadowed by the constant reminder that he was less valued. Despite all that, Dad, Harold was different. He tried, in his own way. He wasn't around much, but he made sure to be there when it mattered. He was the one who encouraged me to pursue art. I nodded, understanding the depth of his bond with Harold, despite the latter's limited presence. When it was time for university, Vivian told me to get a job. No money for education, she said. I managed with scholarships and loans. But it was never about the money, Elaine. It was about being seen, being acknowledged. His story revealed not just neglect, but a deep-seated desire for acceptance, something his family never gave him. When we decided to get married, I saw how they treated you. The snide comments, the disrespect. It hurt, Elaine, but I thought we could stay away, build our own world. I remembered those early encounters, the thinly veiled jabs, the dismissal of our relationship. It was clear now, this disdain wasn't new. It was a pattern long established in Alex's life. But Harold's illness changed everything, Alex continued. We couldn't just stand by. And you, Elaine, you were there for him more than anyone. A tear slipped down my cheek as I remembered Harold's grateful smiles, his warm thanks every time we visited. They think we're after the money, Alex said, his voice hardening. But they're the ones obsessed with it. They never cared for Dad, only for what he had. I nodded, feeling a surge of anger. Their greed, their cruel accusations, it was all a reflection of their own twisted desires. We'll find a way to set this right, Alex, I said firmly. For Harold, for us, we won't let them tarnish his memory. Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. We'll do it together, Elaine. We'll make sure they get what they deserve. As we sat there, united in our resolve, the path ahead was clear. We would fight back, not with their weapons of greed and deceit, but with the truth and the strength of our bond. The sterile smell of the hospital lingered in the air as Alex and I walked through the quiet corridors. Each step felt heavy, a reminder of the countless times we had made this journey to visit Harold. As we entered his room, the sight of Harold lying frail and pale on the hospital bed never failed to stir a deep sadness in me. Despite his condition, his eyes lit up when he saw us. Elaine, Alex, my dear ones. Harold's voice was weak but filled with warmth. We approached his bedside, and I took his hand gently, noticing how it trembled slightly. How are you feeling today, Dad? Alex asked, concern etching his features. Just being here with you both is a comfort, Harold replied, squeezing my hand. I couldn't help but think of Vivian, Greg, and Nora. Their absence in these crucial moments spoke volumes of their indifference. Dad, we brought you some of your favorite music, I said, trying to bring some cheer into the room. Let's listen together. As the soft melodies filled the room, I saw a tear roll down Harold's cheek. It was moments like these that made me realize the depth of his loneliness, exacerbated by his family's neglect. The door suddenly burst open, and in came Vivian, Greg, and Nora, their arrival like a storm disrupting the calm. Harold, we're here! Oh, how terrible you look, Vivian exclaimed, her tone lacking genuine concern. I felt Harold's grip on my hand tighten, a silent plea for strength. Mother, we were just spending some quiet time with Dad, Alex said, his voice strained. Greg scoffed, looking around the room with disinterest. Quiet time? More like making sure he remembers you in his will. Nora joined in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Elaine, still playing the devoted daughter-in-law, hoping to get a bigger piece of the pie? Their words were like daggers, but I remained composed, not wanting to upset Harold. We're here because we care for Dad, not for his money, I said firmly, meeting their accusing eyes. Vivian snorted. Care? You're nothing but gold diggers. Harold, don't trust them. Harold, who had been silent, finally spoke. Enough. Elaine and Alex have been my only comfort in these trying times. They are my family. His declaration was a blow to Vivian and her children. Their faces contorted in anger and disbelief. You'll regret this, Harold, Vivian hissed, storming out of the room with Greg and Nora following her. Once they were gone, a heavy silence fell. Harold looked exhausted, the encounter having drained his remaining strength. "Elaine, Alex, I'm sorry you have to endure this," Harold whispered. "We're here for you, Dad, always," Alex replied, his voice filled with unwavering loyalty. As we left the hospital that evening, a resolute anger settled in my heart. Vivian and her children's greed and cruelty knew no bounds, but Alex and I were determined to stand against them, to protect Harold and honor his wishes. The injustice inflicted upon us, upon Harold, would not go unanswered. We were ready to fight back, to ensure that the true colors of our adversaries were brought to light. The days following Harold's funeral were a blur of grief and disbelief. Alex and I tried to find solace in each other, but the shadow of his family's callousness loomed over us. It was on a bleak Tuesday morning when the unexpected happened. A knock at our door revealed a stern-looking man in a suit, introducing himself as Mr. Simmons, Harold's attorney. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I'm here regarding Harold's last will and testament," Mr. Simmons announced, his tone formal yet sympathetic. Alex and I exchanged a look of surprise. We were unaware Harold had made a will. "Please come in," I said, leading him to the living room. As Mr. Simmons unfolded the documents, the anticipation in the room was palpable. Harold made it clear in his will that his entire estate, including the $2 million inheritance, is to be left to you, Alex, and Elaine, Mr. Simmons stated. The revelation hit us like a bolt of lightning. All this time, Harold had planned to leave everything to us. "But why us?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harold felt that you two were the only ones who genuinely cared for him in his final years. He was deeply hurt by the rest of the family's indifference and greed," Mr. Simmons explained. The truth of Harold's feelings towards his family, now laid bare, was both a validation and a burden. We were honored by his trust, yet saddened by the extent of his loneliness and pain. "What about Vivian, Greg, and Nora?" I asked, my mind racing with the implications of this revelation. Harold explicitly disinherited them. "They are not to receive anything from the estate," Mr. Simmons replied, his tone indicating finality. I could almost hear Vivian's outraged scream, Greg's indignant protests, Nora's incredulous gasps. The news would hit them like a tidal wave, shattering their illusions of entitlement. "This will undoubtedly cause a stir," Alex said, a hint of worry in his eyes. "Yes, but Harold's wishes are legally binding. I will handle any disputes that may arise," Mr. Simmons assured us, his confidence somewhat easing our concerns. After Mr. Simmons left, Alex and I sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Harold had entrusted us with his legacy, a clear message to his family that their behavior was inexcusable. The sense of justice was bittersweet. While we felt vindicated, it pained us to think of Harold's final days clouded by such decisions. "We need to prepare, Elaine," Alex said, determination in his voice. "Vivian and her children won't take this lightly. We must stand our ground." I nodded, feeling a mix of resolve and apprehension. "We'll do this together for Harold," I said, my voice steady. As we braced ourselves for the inevitable storm, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The revelation of Harold's will was not just a testament to his love for us, but also a catalyst for the impending battle with his family. The confrontation was inevitable. Just days after learning of Harold's will, Vivian, Greg, and Nora appeared at our doorstep, their faces twisted in anger and disbelief. "You can't possibly think you're keeping all of Harold's money," Vivian spat as soon as we opened the door. Her words were like venom, but Alex and I stood firm, united in our resolve. "Harold made his wishes clear," Alex said calmly. "He left everything to us because we were the only ones who truly cared for him." Greg stepped forward, his eyes burning with rage. "You manipulated him. This is fraud." I felt a surge of anger at their accusations. "Manipulating? That's rich coming from you. You barely visited him, and now you claim rights to his estate?" Nora's voice was shrill with fury. "We're his real family, not some gold-digging wife and the son he barely tolerated." The cruelty in her words stung, but I refused to let it show. "That's where you're wrong," I countered. "Family isn't just about blood, it's about who's there in times of need, and you were all conspicuously absent." Vivian's face contorted in a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't do this to us. We deserve that inheritance." "It's not about what you think you deserve," Alex said, his voice steady. "It's about honoring Dad's wishes. He saw through your greed and selfishness." You'll regret this, Greg threatened, stepping closer. We won't let you get away with stealing our inheritance. I felt Alex's hand tighten around mine, a silent pledge of support. This isn't theft, it's justice, I declared, meeting their hostile gazes head-on. You neglected Harold, and now you're paying the price. Vivian's expression shifted to one of begrudging realization. So, this is how it is. You've turned him against us, and now you're taking everything. No, Vivian, Alex said, a hint of sadness in his voice. You did this to yourselves. Your actions, your choices led to this moment. The air was thick with tension, the unsaid words hanging heavy between us. Leave, now, I said firmly. You have no claim here, not anymore. With one last glare, Vivian, Greg, and Nora turned and left, their departure leaving a trail of bitterness and resentment. Closing the door behind them, Alex and I let out a collective sigh. The battle lines were drawn, the fight for justice was just beginning. But we were ready, armed with the truth and the strength of our conviction. We did the right thing, Elaine, Alex said, wrapping his arm around me. I nodded, feeling a sense of righteous vindication mixed with sorrow. We did for Harold. As we stood in the silence of our home, we knew this was far from over. But whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, standing tall against the greed and deceit that sought to overshadow Harold's final wishes. The aftermath of the confrontation left a charged atmosphere in our home. Alex and I knew this was just the beginning of a longer battle against Vivian, Greg, and Nora's greed. We were having dinner when the phone rang. Alex answered, and I could immediately tell from his tone that it was them again. You can't possibly think we'll just walk away from this, Vivian's voice, shrill and agitated, echoed from the speaker. Alex put her on speakerphone, and I braced myself for another round of accusations. We've seen lawyers, Alex. They say we have a case. You'll be hearing from us, Greg's voice threatened. I exchanged a look with Alex. Let them try, I whispered. Alex spoke into the phone, his voice firm. You heard, Mr. Simmons. Dad's will is clear and legally binding. You were disinherited for a reason. You think you're so smart, but we'll see who gets the last laugh, Nora chimed in, her voice dripping with malice. It's not about winning or losing, I said, my voice steady as I took the phone from Alex. It's about what's right. Harold knew the truth about all of you. There was a pause, and then Vivian's voice returned, colder and more calculating. You think you know everything, Elaine? We're his blood. That has to count for something. It counted for nothing when you ignored him in his final years, I countered. You'll regret this. We won't let you get away with it. Greg's voice was a mix of anger and desperation. As far as we're concerned, this matter is closed, Alex said, ending the call. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation heavy on our shoulders. They won't give up easily, I said, more to myself than Alex. But we have the truth on our side, Alex replied, reaching for my hand. Dad wanted us to have this. We'll honor his wishes, no matter what they throw at us. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Harold's final act had been one of love and trust towards us, and we would defend it with everything we had. Over the next few days, we prepared for the legal battle that loomed ahead. We gathered documents, spoke to Mr. Simmons, and fortified ourselves for the fight. Then, one evening, as we reviewed our strategy, the doorbell rang. Standing on our doorstep were Vivian, Greg, and Nora, their faces a mix of anger and defeat. We want to talk, Vivian said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. We have nothing to discuss, Alex replied, his stance unwavering. Just hear us out, Nora pleaded, a rare note of sincerity in her voice. Reluctantly, we let them in. They sat across from us, their body language deflated. We've been to several lawyers. They all say the same thing. The will is ironclad, Vivian admitted, her eyes avoiding ours. So what do you want? I asked, my tone cautious. We're sorry, Greg said, the words seeming to pain him. We were wrong about Harold, about you. I looked at Alex, seeing the skepticism in his eyes mirrored in mine. Sorry doesn't change what you did, what you said, Alex said coldly. We know, Nora added, her voice quivering, but we're family. Can't we find a way to move past this? Alex and I exchanged a look, the decision clear between us. There's no moving past this, I said firmly. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. They left soon after, their departure marked by a heavy silence. Alex and I sat back down, the finality of the situation sinking in. We did the right thing, Alex said after a moment, his voice resolute. We did, I agreed, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. For Harold and for us. The battle was over, but the scars remained. We had stood our ground, defended Harold's legacy, and in doing so, had closed the door on a part of our lives that was filled with greed and betrayal. Months had passed since we had last seen Vivian, Greg, and Nora. The legal battle, as predicted, never materialized. Their threats had been nothing but hollow words, a final attempt to intimidate us. One evening, as Alex and I sat on our porch, enjoying the peaceful twilight, he broke the silence with a reflective tone. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked, gazing into the distance. "I try not to," I admitted. "But sometimes I wonder if they ever understood the pain they caused, not just to us, but to Harold." Alex nodded, a hint of sorrow in his eyes. "I doubt it. Their greed blinded them to everything else." The conversation drifted to other topics, but a part of my mind remained on that bitter family conflict. It was a chapter of our lives that had closed, but its echoes still lingered. A few days later, we received news that served as a stark reminder of the consequences of their actions. Through a mutual acquaintance, we learned of their downfall. Greg's business, already struggling, had collapsed under mounting debts. Nora, caught in her web of lies and deceit, faced a bitter divorce. And Vivian, abandoned by her children in her time of need, was left to grapple with her loneliness and remorse. Hearing of their misfortunes didn't bring us joy. There was no satisfaction in seeing them suffer, only a deep sense of pity and a reminder of the destructive power of greed. As we moved on with our lives, Alex and I made a conscious decision to focus on the positive. We invested Harold's inheritance wisely, ensuring his legacy would continue to support causes he believed in. We also started a small foundation in his name to help those in need, a fitting tribute to a man who had shown us so much kindness. Life had a way of coming full circle. A year after Harold's passing, we welcomed a new addition to our family, a baby boy we named Ethan. Holding him in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and hope. He was a new beginning, a chance to build a legacy of love and kindness, far removed from the shadows of greed and betrayal. As Ethan grew, we often told him stories of his grandfather Harold, ensuring his memory lived on in the heart of our family. We wanted Ethan to know the values Harold stood for: kindness, compassion, and integrity. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching Ethan play in the garden, Alex put his arm around me. "We made it through the storm," he said, a note of contentment in his voice. "We did," I replied, leaning into him. "And we built something beautiful from it." The journey had been fraught with pain and conflict, but it had led us to a place of peace and understanding. We had turned the bitterness of the past into a future filled with love and hope. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over our home, I realized that this was what Harold had wanted for us: a life of happiness, free from the toxic grasp of greed. And in that moment, I knew we had truly honored his legacy. The night air was thick with tension as Adrian's words sliced through the silence of our living room. "I regret marrying an older woman," he spat out, his eyes devoid of the warmth I once knew. His words stung, a stark reminder of how far we drifted apart. "My name is Alara, a 36-year-old woman working for an international corporation. Life with Adrian, my husband, 3 years my junior, started as a harmonious melody. He was a charismatic leader, the kind who naturally commanded attention. I never minded his dominance. In fact, it brought a sense of balance to our relationship. Our routine was simple. I managed the household chores while Adrian took charge of our outdoor activities. It was a dynamic that worked, until the day my father fell seriously ill. I still remember the frantic call from my mother, her voice trembling, telling me about my father's worsening condition. I rushed to the hospital, only to find that I was too late. The grief was overwhelming, a void that seemed to consume everything, including my marriage. Adrian's lack of empathy during that time was the first crack in our once solid foundation. He didn't come to the hospital, citing urgent work commitments. I tried to understand, to justify his absence, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. As I navigated through the pain of losing my father, Adrian's support was conspicuously absent. His true colors began to show, his once endearing confidence turning into unbearable arrogance. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams, now echoed with arguments and bitter words. "Alara, can't you see I'm under a lot of pressure at work?" Adrian would often say, dismissing my attempts to discuss our strained relationship. I tried to hold on, believing that this was just a phase, a hurdle we could overcome. But the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me through thick and thin, was slowly fading away, replaced by a stranger who wore his face. Tonight was different, though. Tonight his words were like a cold, sharp blade, cutting through any pretense of affection or respect. His disdain was clear, his regret for our marriage palpable. "You're older, Alara. You should be grateful that someone like me chose to marry you," Adrian sneered, his voice laced with contempt. The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The realization dawned on me, harsh and unyielding. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, saw me as nothing more than a convenience, a mistake he regretted. I stood there silent, the weight of his words crushing me. But amidst the pain, a spark of something else flickered, anger, defiance, perhaps even a hint of liberation. I was more than the sum of my years, more than Adrian's condescending view of me. The night ended with Adrian storming off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. But as I sat there, a plan began to form, a path to reclaiming my life from the shadows of a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose. As I prepared for the day, the resolve in my heart grew stronger. It was time to take a stand, to show Adrian that I was not the weak, older woman he thought he could belittle and discard. The stage was set, and I was ready to turn the tables. It was time for Adrian to see the true strength of the woman he had underestimated. The days following our heated argument felt like walking through a dense fog. Adrian's presence in our home turned into a constant reminder of the deepening chasm between us. His dismissive attitude, once an occasional irritation, had now become a daily occurrence. It was a Thursday evening when things escalated. I had just returned from a grueling day at work, hoping for a quiet night, but the moment I stepped in, I knew peace was a luxury I wouldn't have. "Alara, you're late again." Adrian's voice was cold, devoid of concern. "I had to attend a dinner alone because you couldn't make time." "I had an important meeting, Adrian. I told you this morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's your excuse for everything, isn't it?" "Your work, always your work," he retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "What do you want me to do, Adrian? Quit my job to cater to your every whim?" His laugh was bitter. "Oh, please, you and your high-flying job. You think you're so important, don't you?" The conversation spiraled from there, each word a sharpened barb aimed to wound. Adrian's ability to twist my words left me reeling. His accusations were baseless, yet delivered with a conviction that made me question my own sanity. "Maybe I was wrong about you, Alara. Maybe you're not the woman I thought I married," he sneered. I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "And who did you think you married, Adrian? A submissive wife who would bow to your every demand?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Maybe I should have. At least she would have appreciated what I do for her. The audacity of his words left me speechless. The man I once saw as my partner, my equal, now stood before me as someone unrecognizable, someone who viewed our marriage as a transaction. As the night wore on, the realization sank in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a fundamental mismatch of values and respect. The man I married, who once looked at me with love, now gazed at me with disdain and entitlement. I lay awake that night, the echoes of our argument replaying in my mind. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I couldn't continue living this way. I needed to break free from the oppressive atmosphere that our home had become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. It was time to start planning my escape from this toxic marriage. I needed to gather my strength, my resources, and most importantly, my dignity. As I left for work, I glanced back at the house, a place that once symbolized love and companionship. Now it stood as a monument to my misplaced trust and a relationship that had soured beyond repair. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. Adrian's reign of emotional tyranny was about to come to an end, and I was determined to emerge victorious. The tension in our house was like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. Adrian's disdain had become more overt, his words more cutting. But it was on the eve of my father's first death anniversary that everything reached a boiling point. "I can't believe you expect me to attend this morbid gathering," Adrian said disdainfully as I prepared for the next day. "It's important to me, Adrian. It's about honoring my father's memory," I replied, my voice laced with a plea for understanding. "Your father, not mine. Why should I have to waste my time?" He scoffed, rolling his eyes. I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "It's not a waste of time to support your wife during a time of grief," Adrian snorted. "Oh, please. It's been a year, Alara. You need to move on. Besides, I have more important things to do." His words stung like a slap. "More important than your wife's feelings?" I shot back, my voice rising. He smirked. "Exactly. I'm glad you're finally understanding where your little family drama stands in the grand scheme of things." That was it, the final straw. My patience, worn thin by months of neglect and disrespect, finally shattered. "You're unbelievable, Adrian. You're selfish, heartless." He leaned in, his eyes cold. "That's rich coming from you, Alara. Always so wrapped up in your work, in your own world." I couldn't contain my fury. "At least I care about others, unlike you." Adrian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Care? Is that what you call it? It's no wonder your father was always so disappointed in you." That lie, that unfounded accusation about my beloved father, was more than I could bear. "Get out," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. "What?" Adrian's smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. "Get out of this house! I can't stand to look at you anymore!" I shouted, the words erupting from deep within me. For a moment, Adrian looked taken aback, but then his expression hardened. "Fine, if that's what you want. But remember, Alara, you're the one who's going to end up alone." With those parting words, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking, a mix of anger, relief, and profound sadness washing over me. The house was eerily silent, the void left by Adrian's absence, both a balm and a reminder of what our marriage had become. I sank onto the couch, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. One thing was clear: I couldn't let Adrian get away with his behavior. It was time for him to learn that his actions had consequences. As I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not only leave Adrian, but I would also make sure he regretted the way he treated me. He thought he could demean me, abandon me in my time of need, and face no repercussions? He was sorely mistaken. I would start by securing my finances, ensuring I was in a strong position to leave. Then I would gather evidence of Adrian's emotional abuse, his neglect, and his infidelity, if my suspicions were correct. He wouldn't see it coming. He was too arrogant to ever imagine I could be a threat. But I was more than he bargained for. I was Alara, and I was done being the victim. It was time for Adrian to pay for his cruelty, and I was just the person to ensure he did. The morning of my father's death anniversary dawned, a somber reminder of the loss that still echoed in my heart. Adrian had not returned since our explosive argument, and his absence on this significant day only deepened the wound. As I dressed in black, preparing to honor my father's memory, my phone buzzed. It was Adrian, his name on the screen reigniting a flicker of anger. I answered, bracing myself. "Alara, I've decided I won't be attending the memorial today." Adrian's voice was casual, almost indifferent. "You decided? It's my father's anniversary, Adrian." I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice. "Yeah, well, I have a golf game with some clients. It's important for my career," he replied nonchalantly. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "Your career? Is that all you ever think about?" "What's that supposed to mean? You're one to talk about obsession with work," he retorted. "This isn't about work, Adrian. This is about being there for your wife when she needs you," I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Adrian sighed audibly. "Look, Alara, we both know you're capable of handling this on your own. You always do." "That's not the point," I exclaimed, feeling a surge of frustration. "Whatever, Alara. I don't have time for this. I need to get ready," he said, dismissive as ever. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in silence, the weight of his absence heavier than ever. It was in that moment, surrounded by the cold walls of our home, that I realized Adrian would never change. He was a man consumed by his own needs, incapable of empathy or support. As I made my way to the memorial service, memories of my father flooded my mind. He had always been my pillar of strength, a guiding light through my darkest days. Now, in his absence, I found myself facing one of my greatest challenges alone. Throughout the service, I put on a brave face, but inside I was seething with a mix of grief and anger. Adrian's blatant disregard for my feelings was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. He had promised to be my partner, to stand by me in good times and bad, yet here I was, mourning alone, while he played golf. The ride home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Adrian had pushed me too far, and it was time he faced the consequences of his selfishness. I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. First, I would secure my financial independence, ensuring I had the resources to leave Adrian for good. Then, I would gather evidence of his neglect and emotional abuse, building a case that would leave him with nothing. As I walked through the door of our now loveless home, I felt a newfound sense of determination. Adrian had underestimated me, mistaking my patience for weakness, but he was about to learn just how strong Alara could be. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by his rules. It was time for Adrian to face the music, and I would be the one conducting the orchestra. The days following the memorial were a blur of silent preparation and cold determination. I was like a chess player, meticulously planning each move. My first step was to secure my financial independence, a task I approached with a newfound sense of urgency. It was during this time that I made a discovery that would escalate my plans. I found divorce papers on Adrian's desk, already signed. His boldness in preparing for a divorce without even a discussion was a clear message of his disregard for our marriage. Staring at the papers, a mixture of shock and relief washed over me. This was the point of no return. I called Adrian, needing to confront him about this final betrayal. "Adrian, I found the divorce papers. Is this how you tell me it's over?" My voice was steady, masking the turmoil inside. His laughter chilled me. "Oh, you found them? Saves me the trouble of bringing it up. I thought it's what you wanted, given how things have been." His casual dismissal of our marriage ignited a fire within me. "You think you can just discard me like this after everything?" "It's not about discarding, Alara. It's about moving on. I need someone who supports my career, not someone who's always competing with me," he replied, his tone laced with arrogance. The irony of his words was almost laughable. "Support your career? What about my career, Adrian? What about supporting me?" Adrian scoffed. "Your career? Please, Alara, it's always been about you and your achievements. I'm tired of being in your shadow." His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. "You're delusional, Adrian. You've always been the one in the spotlight. I was just the one behind you, cleaning up your messes." There was a pause, and then Adrian's voice turned cold. "Well, Alara, if you're not happy with the divorce, feel free to contest it. But I'm done here. I need a fresh start, with someone who appreciates me." The call ended, leaving me standing in a room filled with memories of a love that had turned sour. But amidst the heartache, there was a sense of liberation. Adrian had shown his true colors, and now it was time for me to paint a new picture of my life, one where he had no place. I would take the divorce papers to the family court, but not before ensuring I had everything in place to leave Adrian with nothing but his arrogance. He thought he could control me, break me down, but he was about to learn that Alara was not a woman to be underestimated. The revenge I planned was not just for me, but for every moment of neglect, every insult, every time he made me feel unworthy. Adrian would regret the day he underestimated the strength of the woman he married. As I set my plan into motion, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was no longer the passive wife, bending to Adrian's will. I was a force to be reckoned with, and my storm was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I meticulously gathered evidence of Adrian's neglect and emotional abuse, documenting each instance with precision. It was a grim task, but necessary for the battle ahead. As I prepared for my next move, fate intervened in an unexpected way. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Adrian's career was faltering. His overconfidence had led to several critical mistakes at work, and his reputation was suffering. This news, though not surprising, gave me an added edge. Adrian's world was starting to crumble, and I was ready to give it the final push. Then came the day of reckoning. I confronted Adrian one last time, armed with the evidence I had gathered and a steely resolve. "Adrian, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm as he walked through the door. He glanced at me, annoyance flickering in his eyes. What now, Alara? I'm tired and not in the mood for another one of your lectures. It's not a lecture. It's about the divorce, I replied, holding up the papers. He smirked. Finally ready to sign them? Decided to give up? I met his gaze, unwavering. No, Adrian, I'm not giving up. I'm fighting back. Confusion replaced his smug expression. What are you talking about? I've gathered evidence, Adrian, evidence of all the times you neglected me, emotionally abused me. I've documented everything, and I know about your failing career. Adrian's face turned pale, his facade cracking. You wouldn't dare. You think anyone will believe you? They will when they see the evidence. And let's not forget your tarnished reputation at work. How do you think that will play out in court? I countered. For the first time I saw fear in Adrian's eyes. He had underestimated me, thinking I would quietly retreat. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. Alara, you can't do this to me. I'll lose everything, he stammered, the arrogance gone from his voice. That's the point, Adrian. You took me for granted, treated me like I was nothing. Now, you'll see what it's like to have nothing, I said, the words tasting of sweet revenge. Adrian's defeat was evident in his slumped shoulders and defeated gaze. He had lost, not just the battle, but the war. As I watched him leave, a sense of triumph mixed with sadness washed over me. This was not the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I was left with. Adrian had forced my hand, and I had played it to the best of my ability. The days that followed were filled with legal proceedings and negotiations. But with my evidence and Adrian's crumbling professional life, the advantage was mine. The divorce was finalized in my favor, leaving me with a sense of closure and a fresh start. Adrian, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. His career continued its downward spiral, and he was left with little to his name. It was a harsh outcome, but one he had brought upon himself. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to the future with a sense of hope. I had emerged from the ashes of a broken marriage stronger and more determined. Adrian's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for my transformation. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was Alara, reborn and ready to take on the world. In the aftermath of the divorce, my life took on a new rhythm, one that was entirely my own. The shadow of Adrian's presence had dissipated, leaving me with a newfound sense of freedom. I embraced this change, allowing it to reshape my world. It was during this period of transformation that an opportunity arose, an offer to work at our company's overseas headquarters. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed of, but had previously set aside for the sake of my marriage. Now nothing held me back. As I prepared for this new chapter, Adrian reached out, his voice a mixture of desperation and false contrition. Alara, can we talk? I've been thinking maybe we rushed into this divorce. I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction at his words. Rushed, Adrian? After everything you've done? After everything you said? He hesitated, then continued. I know I made mistakes, but we can start over. I've changed. The claim was laughable. Changed? Adrian, you only reach out now because you've seen the consequences of your actions. You haven't changed. You're just scared of being alone. His voice cracked, a sign of his crumbling facade. Alara, please? I need you. I've lost my job, my reputation. I have nothing. The irony of his plea was not lost on me. You need me, or do you need someone to fall back on? I'm not your safety net, Adrian. I'm moving on to a better life, a life I put on hold for you. There was silence on the other end, and then a defeated sigh. So this is really it, then? Yes, Adrian. This is it. Goodbye. I ended the call, a final full stop to our conversation and to our relationship. As I boarded the plane to my new destination, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I had undertaken. From a woman who had loved and trusted to one betrayed and belittled, and now to a woman reborn with strength and independence. The flight was long, but it gave me time to contemplate. I thought about my father, how he had always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. In a way, this move was a tribute to him, a realization of the aspirations he had always supported. Upon arrival, the new environment was a breath of fresh air. The culture, the people, the work, it was all invigorating. I threw myself into my new role with a passion I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues were welcoming, and I quickly established myself as a valuable member of the team. News from back home trickled in. Adrian's life continued its downward spiral, a path he had chosen through his actions. There was no joy in his misfortune, only a stark reminder of the consequences of selfishness and arrogance. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer painful. They were reminders of what I had overcome, symbols of my resilience. I occasionally thought of Adrian, wondering if he ever realized the full extent of his mistakes. But those thoughts were fleeting, mere echoes of a past life. My days were filled with new challenges and adventures. I explored my new city, made new friends, and even began to dabble in hobbies I had long neglected. Life was vibrant, full of possibilities. As I looked out at the city skyline one evening, a sense of contentment washed over me. I had faced adversity, fought for my dignity, and emerged victorious. I was Ilara, no longer defined by the shadows of a failed marriage, but by the bright promise of a future I had reclaimed. This was not just a new chapter, it was a whole new book. And I was the author, ready to write a story of success, happiness, and true fulfillment. My name is Adeline, and at 42, I find myself living a life far removed from the carefree dreams of my youth. My days are a relentless cycle, split between my clerical job and the dwindling family liquor store, a once thriving establishment now teetering on the edge of ruin. The store, nestled in a cozy corner of our neighborhood, had been the pride of our family for decades. It was a time when our name was synonymous with quality spirits, and our monopoly in the area was unchallenged. But as years passed, strict regulations strangled the nightlife, and our primary clientele, hotel banquet halls, pubs, and restaurants, dwindled to a mere trickle. In the midst of this decline stood my father, Harold, a man stubbornly clinging to the past. His management style, if one could call it that, was a recipe for disaster. Debts mounted, yet he persisted with his outdated methods, blind to the changing world around him. 2 years ago, in a desperate bid to salvage what was left of our legacy, I moved back into my childhood home. The liquor store, struggling to stay afloat, became my evening haunt after office hours. Each day as I stepped through its doors, the familiar jingle of the bell was a stark reminder of the burden I shouldered. "Dad, are you drinking again?" I'd often find him behind the counter, a bottle in hand, his laughter a stark contrast to the store's empty aisles. "Ha, these bottles aren't selling anyway." "Might as well enjoy them," he'd slur, the smell of alcohol heavy in the air. I'd sigh, a mix of frustration and resignation, as I set about cleaning the cluttered store and delving into the books. Our finances were a labyrinth of debts and overdue bills, a testament to years of neglect. Dinner was always a solitary affair, long past 9 p.m., after the day's tasks were done. My parents, lost in their own world, would be asleep, leaving the kitchen and the responsibility of meals to me. Every night, I'd prepare a simple meal, usually instant ramen, and then start prepping for the next morning's breakfast. My mom preferred bread, while Dad was a rice person. It was a small detail, but in our household, even the smallest preferences were my responsibility. Weekends, which should have been my respite, began at the crack of dawn, thanks to my mother, Irene. "Adeline, make your father's miso soup quickly," she'd demand, her voice cutting through any hopes of rest. "Why can't you do that, Mom?" I'd protest, only to be met with her sharp retort. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here? Now get up." I had always been the meticulous one, the daughter who naturally took on chores and responsibilities. It started in high school, and by the time I graduated, I was the family's backbone. Tired of this endless cycle, I had taken up the office job right after school, hoping to escape. But escape, it seemed, was a luxury I couldn't afford. The liquor store's debts, a staggering $3 million, loomed over us like a dark cloud. Living frugally became second nature to me. $1 cosmetics, homemade lunches, enduring the cold to save on heating, all in a desperate bid to keep us afloat. One day, as I suggested leveraging the internet to boost sales, my father's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "Our old way is the best way. I'm not the problem, the world is." His words echoed in my head as I juggled household chores with my attempts to rejuvenate the business. There was never enough time, always a step behind, always just out of reach of a solution. But I was determined. Against my father's resistance, I started online classes, selling rare alcohol from our store. This innovative approach was a hit, especially with restrictions limiting people's movements. Slowly, the business picked up. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. But as our store's name gained online visibility, so too did my workload increase. Free time became a distant memory, yet I pushed on, believing it was all for the greater good. That belief, however, was about to be shattered. The rhythm of my life was an unending dance of duty and disappointment. Each day, I awoke to a world where my efforts seemed invisible to those who mattered most. My family's store, once a symbol of pride, had become a chain around my neck, dragging me down into an abyss of resentment and exhaustion. One particularly grueling evening, I found myself sifting through piles of overdue invoices, the numbers blurring before my eyes. The store was silent, save for the occasional clink of a bottle as my father, Harold, indulged in his habitual drinking. "Dad, we can't keep going like this. We're sinking," I said, my voice a mix of despair and frustration. He simply chuckled, his words slurred. "Ah, Adeline, always so serious. Relax, have a drink. It'll all work out." His nonchalance was like a slap in the face. How could he be so blind? The weight of our debts was crushing, and yet there he sat, drowning his sorrows in the very product that was supposed to be our salvation. The following morning, as I prepared breakfast, my mother, Irene, sauntered into the kitchen. "Make sure you clean the house today. Clara and her husband might visit," she ordered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara, my younger sister, was the polar opposite of me. Free-spirited, carefree, she had floated through life on a cloud of whims and desires, always landing softly on the cushion of our parents' support. Even after marrying a man as aimless as herself, she continued to lean on our parents financially. As I scrubbed and cleaned, the bitter thoughts churned in my mind. Why was I the one to bear all this? Why did Clara get to live a life of leisure while I toiled away? Later that day, as Clara breezed into the store, her laughter echoed mockingly off the walls. "Oh, Adeline, still stuck in this old place? You really should get out more," she chided, her words tinged with a carelessness that stung. I bit back a sharp retort, focusing instead on the task at hand. The store, now a little busier thanks to my online efforts, demanded my full attention. But Clara's words lingered, a painful reminder of the life I could have had. That night, as I lay in bed, the exhaustion of my double life weighed heavily on me. My parents' indifference, Clara's thoughtlessness, the endless cycle of work, it was all becoming too much. A voice inside me whispered of change, of breaking free, but fear and duty held me back. The next day brought no respite. As I balanced the accounts, my mother's voice cut through the quiet. "Adeline, when are you going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know." I looked up, stunned. Was this really what she worried about? Not our failing business, not the crushing debt, but my marital status? "Maybe when our store isn't on the brink of collapse," I replied curtly, turning back to my work. Her scoff was the only response I received. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to take its toll. Sleepless nights, skipped meals, and constant stress left me worn and weary. But there was no time to rest, no time to breathe. The store, the house, my job, they all demanded more of me than I had to give. It was during one of these endless days that I received the news. Clara was pregnant. The family buzzed with excitement, a stark contrast to the chaos that was our reality. "That's great, the first grandchild," I managed to say, a forced smile on my lips. But my mother's next words were like a cold splash of water. "That's why you need to leave the house." I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring within me. "What? Why?" "You need to make room for Clara and her family," my father added, his tone dismissive. I was speechless. After everything I had done, sacrificed, endured, this was how they repaid me? A cold, unceremonious dismissal? The injustice of it burned my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. But in that moment, something shifted within me. A resolve, steel and unwavering, took root. I would leave, but on my terms, and they would soon realize the true cost of their ingratitude. The decision to leave my childhood home, the epicenter of my lifelong sacrifices, didn't come easy. Yet, as I packed my belongings, each item I tucked away felt like a shard of the heavy chain I was shedding. The house, once a sanctuary of family memories, had morphed into a prison of ungrateful demands and unreciprocated toil. In the midst of my packing, my father Harold stumbled in, reeking of liquor. "What's this? Planning a little trip?" he sneered, his voice dripping with derision. I straightened up, meeting his bleary eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "I'm moving out," I stated, the words tasting like freedom. His reaction was a bitter laugh. "Moving out? And who's going to run the store? Cook and clean? You think you're irreplaceable?" His words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. "You'll have to figure that out, won't you?" I replied, turning back to my packing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Amidst the chaos of moving and handling my office work, I still found myself drawn back to the liquor store, the pull of responsibility too ingrained to ignore. One evening, as I was tidying up the store for what felt like the last time, Clara breezed in, her carefree demeanor unchanged. "So you're really leaving us, huh?" she asked, her voice light, almost mocking. I paused, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. "Yes, Clara, I am. Someone else can shoulder the burdens now." Her laughter was a cold echo in the empty store. "Oh, Adeline, always the martyr. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll manage without you." Her words, meant to belittle, only fueled the fire in my heart. My family's true colors were glaringly evident now, selfish, uncaring, and utterly blind to the sacrifices made in their name. The night before my departure, as I sat amidst boxes of my life, a sense of surreal calm enveloped me. The years of being the dependable daughter, the responsible sister, were coming to an end. But as I looked around the room, a wave of sadness hit me. This was the home where I grew up, where I laughed and cried, where I dreamed of a future that was never mine. My mother, Irene, appeared at my door, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Adeline. We need you here." Her words, so devoid of understanding, stung. "No, Mom, you needed me. You just never realized it." The day I left, the house was silent, an eerie testament to the void I was leaving behind. My parents stood by, their expressions a mix of confusion and resentment, as I loaded the last of my things into the car. As I drove away, the familiar streets of my childhood receded in the rearview mirror. I felt a pang of loss, but more than that, a burgeoning sense of relief. I was leaving behind a life of thankless servitude, stepping into a future where my worth wasn't measured by the sacrifices I made for others. But as the distance between me and my former life grew, so did my resolve. My family, so accustomed to my constant support, would soon face the harsh reality of their own making, and I, freed from their unappreciative grasp, would finally start living for myself. Settling into my new apartment, a modest but cozy space, I felt the first true breath of freedom I had experienced in years. It was a stark contrast to the burdensome atmosphere of my parents' house. Yet, even in this newfound tranquility, the echoes of my past life haunted me. It wasn't long before the reality of my family's dependence on me became painfully apparent. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from home. Each plea for help, each demand for my return, was a reminder of the suffocating expectations I had escaped. One evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone lit up with a familiar number. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my father, Harold, his voice slurred and angry. "Adeline, where are you? The store is a mess. We need you here," he barked into the phone. I clenched my jaw, the old feelings of obligation tugging at me. "Dad, I've moved out. You and Clara will have to manage on your own." His response was a string of insults and accusations, blaming me for abandoning the family in their time of need. His words were like daggers, aimed to wound, but I had grown a shield of resolve. "I'm not your crutch anymore, Dad. You'll have to stand on your own," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The days that followed were a relentless barrage of guilt trips and emotional blackmail. My mother, Irene, played her part well, lamenting how I could leave my family in such dire straits. "You're being selfish, Adeline. Think about what you're doing to us," she implored during one of her many calls. But the years of neglect and underappreciation had hardened my heart. "I've thought about it for far too long, Mom. Now, it's time for me to think about myself." Amidst this tumult, I found solace in my work and the few friends I had kept at a distance over the years. Among them was Marcus, a colleague from the office who had always been kind, but whom I had never allowed myself to get close to. One day, after a particularly grueling call with my mother, Marcus noticed my distress. "Adeline, you okay? You've been looking really stressed lately," he said, his concern genuine. I hesitated, then decided to open up. It's just family stuff. I recently moved out, and they're not taking it well. Marcus listened intently, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. His kindness was a balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and understood. But the reprieve was short-lived. The stress of juggling my new life, the constant barrage from my family, and the lingering guilt took its toll. One day at work, as I sat at my desk, the room began to spin. The last thing I remember was Marcus's voice calling my name before everything went black. I awoke in a hospital bed, my head throbbing with pain. Marcus was there, his face etched with worry. "You gave us quite a scare, Adeline. You collapsed and hit your head. How are you feeling?" Tears welled up in my eyes, not from the pain, but from the overwhelming sense of care and concern I had been denied for so long. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what to say." Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "Don't say anything. Just focus on getting better. And maybe, when you're ready, think about making some changes. You can't keep going like this." His words resonated deep within me. For so long I had lived for others, neglecting my own well-being. It was time to make a change, to live for myself. As I lay in that hospital bed, the realization hit me hard. My family's selfishness and dependence had nearly broken me. But now, I was on the path to healing and self-discovery. And I was determined to not let anyone pull me back into the abyss from which I had just crawled out. Recovering from the incident at work, I found myself at a crossroads. Marcus's words echoed in my mind, urging me to change the trajectory of my life. It was time to prioritize my health and happiness over the never-ending demands of my family. The decision was made. I would no longer be at the beck and call of my parents and Clara. This newfound resolve, however, did not stop the onslaught of calls and messages, each more desperate and manipulative than the last. One evening, as I sifted through my mail, a call from my mother, Irene, came through. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic and anger. "Adeline, you need to come back. The store is failing without you. We're struggling to keep up." Her plea was a twisted symphony of guilt and blame. "You're responsible for this mess. You can't just abandon your family." I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a steely calm. "No, Mom. I'm not responsible for the years of mismanagement and neglect. You and Dad made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." Her response was a mix of incredulous outrage and desperate bargaining, but I stood firm. The chains of guilt and obligation had been broken. As days turned into weeks, the frequency of their calls diminished, replaced by a foreboding silence. I immersed myself in my work and started exploring hobbies I had long neglected. Life was beginning to have a semblance of normalcy and peace. Then, one day, a call from Clara jolted me back to reality. Her voice was hysterical, a stark contrast to her usual carefree tone. "Adeline, you have to help us. The store is on the brink of closure. We're drowning in debt." Her words were laced with panic and a hint of realization of the gravity of their situation. But it was too late. "Clara, I warned you all. I can't fix years of mistakes and neglect. You need to figure it out," I replied, my voice void of the sympathy she sought. The call ended with Clara's sobs and pleas echoing in my ears, but they no longer had the power to sway me. My family had to face the consequences of their actions, the result of years of taking my efforts for granted. Weeks passed, and the inevitable news arrived. The family liquor store, once a cornerstone of our neighborhood, had closed its doors for good. The failure of the business was a harsh blow to my parents and Clara, a bitter taste of reality they had long avoided. I heard through mutual acquaintances about the chaos that ensued. My parents, unable to cope with their new reality, were consumed by blame and regret. Clara and her husband, faced with the harshness of responsibility, were at a loss, their illusory world shattered. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, seeing them finally reap what they had sown. But there was also a pang of sadness for what could have been if only they had appreciated and reciprocated my efforts. As I reflected on these events, I realized this was not just the end of the family business, but the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter filled with sacrifice and unacknowledged labor. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist of my own life. Life in my new world, unshackled from the chains of familial obligation, was a revelation. My days, once dictated by the whims and needs of my parents and Clara, were now my own. I relished the freedom, the ability to make decisions for myself without the cloud of guilt and manipulation that had hovered over me for so long. But even in this newfound paradise, the specter of my old life occasionally intruded. One day, as I was enjoying a quiet evening at home, my phone rang with an all-too-familiar number. The sight of it stirred a mix of irritation and curiosity. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my mother, Irene, her voice tinged with desperation. "Adeline, you have to come back. We're in trouble. The debt collectors are after us." Her plea, once capable of dragging me back into the mire, now fell on deaf ears. "Mom, I've told you before. I can't help you. You need to sort this out yourselves." "But we're your family. How can you abandon us like this?" she cried, the audacity of her words almost laughable. "Family?" I retorted, my voice cold. "The same family that took my efforts for granted, that kicked me out when I was no longer convenient? I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The line went dead, her silence more telling than any words could be. They were finally starting to understand the gravity of their situation, the consequences of their actions. Over the next few weeks, news of my family's plight trickled in through various channels. The once proud owners of the neighborhood liquor store were now pariahs, weighed down by debt and shunned by those they had once considered friends. My sister Clara, who had never known a day of hard work, was now facing the harsh realities of life. Her husband, equally inept at dealing with adversity, was no support. Their marriage, built on convenience and financial dependence, was crumbling under the strain. I heard about their heated arguments, their desperate attempts to find easy ways out, and their incessant blaming of each other for their downfall. It was a pitiful sight. Yet a part of me felt a sense of poetic justice. They were finally experiencing a fraction of the hardships I had endured for their sake. But it was during a chance encounter at a local cafe that the full extent of their decline became apparent. Seated at a corner table, I saw my parents, haggard and worn. They were arguing, their voices a mix of anger and despair. I watched unseen as they laid bare the years of mismanagement and selfish decisions that had led to their undoing. The sight was sobering. This was the family I had left behind, a family that had never valued me until I was gone. Their downfall was of their own making, a direct result of their actions and choices. As I left the cafe, a sense of closure washed over me. I had moved on, built a life where I was valued and appreciated. The echoes of my past, though still lingering, were just that, echoes. They no longer had the power to dictate my life or my happiness. The chapter of my life, defined by thankless sacrifice and unreciprocated loyalty, was closed. Ahead lay a path of self-discovery and fulfillment, a journey I was eager to embark on. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each passing moment affirming my decision to step away from the life that had once threatened to suffocate me. I had created a world for myself, a sanctuary where respect and self-care were not just ideals, but realities. In this new life, I found joy in the small things. The quiet mornings, the leisurely walks, the books I had always wanted to read but never had the time for. My job, once a mere escape from the chaos at home, now became a source of fulfillment and growth. It was during this period of tranquility that Marcus, my colleague who'd been a pillar of support, became more than just a friend. Our shared experiences at work and his unwavering kindness during my tumultuous times blossomed into a deep, meaningful relationship. One crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the park, Marcus stopped, his eyes locking with mine. "Adeline, you've changed so much since we first met. You're stronger, happier. I'm glad I've been a part of this journey with you." His words, simple yet profound, filled my heart. "Marcus, you've been my rock. I don't think I could have made it through without you." As we stood there, amidst the falling leaves, a profound sense of contentment enveloped me. I had come so far from the woman who lived only to serve the whims of her ungrateful family. However, the echoes of my past were not completely silenced. News about my family still reached me, each update a grim reminder of their continuous downward spiral. The once thriving liquor store was now a forgotten relic, its doors permanently shut. My parents, stripped of their pride and business, were a shadow of their former selves, embroiled in a never-ending cycle of blame and regret. Clara and her husband, having lost their financial safety net, were adrift in a sea of their own making. Their frivolous lifestyle, once sustained by my efforts, was now a distant memory. It was during one of my visits to the local market that I overheard a conversation about them. "Have you heard about the family that used to run the liquor store? It's a sad story. They lost everything, even their home," a woman said to her companion, shaking her head. "Yes, I heard. They say the daughter who used to do everything for them left and everything fell apart," the other replied, a tone of sympathy in her voice. I walked past them, a sense of vindication mixed with a tinge of sadness. My family had reaped what they sowed, a harsh lesson in the value of gratitude and hard work. But their fate was no longer my burden. I had released myself from the chains of their expectations and neglect. My life was now my own, a canvas on which I was free to paint my future. As I looked forward to my life with Marcus, a sense of hope and excitement filled me. We had plans, dreams to chase, a future to build together. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. In the end, the greatest revenge was not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the life I had built in spite of them. A life of happiness, love, and fulfillment. A life truly worth living. "Emily, this house, it was always meant to be mine. Sign the divorce papers and leave." Nathan's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth that once drew me to him. I stood in the living room, the walls echoing his harsh words, feeling a mix of disbelief and rising anger. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a battlefield. "You can't be serious," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is our home, Nathan, not just yours." He smirked, a gesture so unlike the man I had fallen in love with. "Our home? Emily, wake up. You're just a housewife. I've been the one paying for everything." I clenched my fists, feeling a storm brewing inside me. "A housewife? Is that all I am to you now?" I retorted. Nathan walked closer, his presence overbearing. "Exactly. You've done nothing but live off my hard work. It's time you realize your place." I could feel my parents' worried glances from the corner of the room. They had come over for dinner, unaware they'd be witnessing the collapse of my marriage. I didn't want them to see me like this, broken, belittled by the man I once adored. "Fine, Nathan," I said, my voice laced with a newfound resolve. "I'll sign your papers. But remember this, you will regret it." He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Regret? Emily, you'll be the one with regrets." I turned away, my parents following silently. As I walked out of that room, out of the life I had built with Nathan, I knew this was not the end. It was a beginning of my fight, my retribution. As I sat in my small but cozy apartment, the memories of my past flooded back, painting a stark contrast to the present. I was the cherished only child of my parents, born after years of their struggling with infertility. Their joy knew no bounds when I came into their lives, a sentiment echoed in every childhood photo, every birthday celebration. "Emily, you were always the center of our world," my mother used to say with a gentle smile. My parents, though not wealthy, spared no effort in providing for me. They encouraged my education, my love for reading, and nurtured my dreams. But with their sacrifice came an unspoken burden, the pressure to find happiness, to make their efforts worthwhile. Meeting Nathan seemed like fulfilling that unspoken promise. He was charming, attentive, and shared a similar background. An only child with aging parents. Our connection was instant, our conversations filled with laughter and shared aspirations. Our wedding was a joyous affair, celebrated with tears and blessings from both families. But the fairy tale started to crumble soon after. Nathan's true colors began to surface once the honeymoon phase faded. His sweet words turned into sharp commands, his once admiring glances now carried a hint of disdain. "You need to be more efficient around the house, Emily. Look at how my mother managed everything despite her job," Nathan would often say, comparing me unfavorably to his mother. His relentless criticism wasn't just confined to household chores. He started controlling our finances, giving me a meager allowance, scoffing whenever I suggested I could return to work. "Work? What for? You can barely manage the house," he'd sneer, his words cutting deeper each time. As I sat there, reminiscing, anger boiled within me. How had I not seen the signs? How had I allowed myself to become this person, a shadow of my former self, living in a loveless, controlling marriage. The realization was bitter, but it sparked a determination within me. I will not let this be my story, I whispered to myself, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time for Nathan to see the real Emily, the woman who wasn't just a beloved child or a submissive wife. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The days turned into months, and the love that once seemed endless within the walls of our home slowly twisted into a suffocating trap. Each morning began with Nathan's cold demands echoing in the kitchen. "Remember, Emily, dinner needs to be perfect. My colleagues are coming over tonight," Nathan would command, his tone leaving no room for protest. On one such evening, as I meticulously set the table for Nathan's guests, my hands trembled with suppressed anger. The sound of laughter and casual conversation filled the living room, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "Emily, this steak is slightly overcooked," Nathan commented loudly, in front of his colleagues, a smirk playing on his lips. His words, seemingly trivial, were a deliberate jab at my efforts. I forced a smile, replying, "I'll make sure it's better next time." But inside, I was screaming. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone who enjoyed belittling his wife, showcasing his dominance in this skewed power play we called our marriage. The evenings when Nathan's parents visited were even more challenging. They treated our home as their own, never acknowledging my efforts to make them comfortable. Nathan, on the other hand, would spare no expense to please them, often at the cost of our own needs. "Why can't we invite my parents sometimes?" I once dared to ask. Nathan's response was swift and harsh. "Why should I spend my money on your parents? They're not my responsibility." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the depth of Nathan's selfishness and disregard for me and my family. He had created a world where only his desires mattered, where I was nothing more than a silent participant in his scripted play of domestic bliss. But no more. The fire of rebellion was kindling within me. I was tired of being a mere puppet, tired of the disrespect and emotional torment. It was time for Nathan to see that I wasn't just his obedient wife. I was a woman with a voice, a woman who deserved respect. "I will not be broken," I whispered into the darkness, my resolve strengthening. The seeds of my plan were already taking root. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The day my parents' house was caught in a devastating fire marked the beginning of my rebellion. The house, a symbol of my childhood memories, now stood partially destroyed. My parents, though safe, were shaken and disoriented. This was more than just a building, it was a repository of cherished memories and love. I remember standing amidst the charred remains, my mother's words echoing in my ears. "This house held so much of our life, Emily. Letting it go feels like losing a part of ourselves." That night, I lay awake, pondering over my parents' plight and my own stifled existence under Nathan's rule. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan not just to secure my parents' future, but also to free myself from Nathan's tyranny. The next day, I approached Nathan, my voice steady but laced with faux naivety. "Nathan, my parents' house? It's beyond repair. I was thinking of buying them a new one, using my savings." His reaction was predictably self-centered. "Your savings? Well, as long as it's not my money." But there was more to my plan than he knew. The house I was considering for my parents was under renovation, set to be a perfect ruse for my greater scheme. Weeks passed, and the day arrived to help my parents move. Nathan, believing the house to be a simple purchase, had no idea of the trap I was setting. His arrogance was my advantage. As I orchestrated the move, Nathan arrived unexpectedly, declaring ownership of the house and demanding a divorce. It was the moment I had been waiting for. "Fine, Nathan, you shall have your divorce," I said calmly, hiding the triumphant smile that threatened to break through. Little did he know, the house he so arrogantly claimed was not the real deal. The actual property, a modest but comfortable home, was waiting, its location a secret kept from Nathan. As I left with my parents, the look of confusion and defeat on Nathan's face was the first victory in my silent war against him. But it was just the beginning. The real retribution was yet to come. In the days following the move, I worked meticulously, my actions cloaked in secrecy. Nathan, oblivious to my intentions, basked in his perceived victory. It was time to unveil the truth and shatter his delusions. I recall the day vividly. Nathan had called, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, Emily, how does it feel to be back at your parents' old cramped house?" I smiled into the phone, a cold, calculated smile. "Actually, Nathan, we're quite comfortable. You see, the house you claimed was just a temporary arrangement. The real property is elsewhere, safe from your greed." There was a pause, a silence filled with his dawning realization. "What are you saying, Emily? That can't be." "Oh, but it is. And about the divorce papers you so kindly left for me, I've already filed them," I continued, my voice steady and strong. Nathan's reaction was a mix of confusion and anger, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant demeanor. "This isn't over, Emily. You can't just—" But I cut him off, no longer willing to endure his tirades. "It is over, Nathan, and let me remind you, I'm not just the meek housewife you thought you married. I am a lawyer, well versed in the law. Your attempts to intimidate me are futile." His silence on the other end was the sweetest revenge, a validation of my newfound empowerment. The years of belittlement and control were coming to an end, and I was the orchestrator of his downfall. As I hung up the phone, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had turned the tables on Nathan, using his arrogance against him. It was a victory, not just for me, but for every moment I had felt insignificant in his shadow. The path ahead was clear. I would rebuild my life, free from Nathan's oppression, and stand tall, a woman reborn from the ashes of a marriage that had sought to diminish her. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. My phone buzzed, and Nathan's name flashed on the screen. Bracing myself, I answered, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Emily, this is madness. You can't do this to me." Nathan's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed and condescending tone. "Oh, but I can, and I have, Nathan," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. "You thought you could walk over me, take what's mine, and discard me like I was nothing. You were wrong." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind as he tried to comprehend the gravity of his situation. "Emily, listen, we can work this out. Let's forget about the divorce and start over," he pleaded, his voice laced with false sweetness. The suggestion was laughable. "Start over? After everything you've done? No, Nathan. I deserve better, and so do my parents." I could feel his desperation through the phone. "But the house, my reputation, my career, you're ruining everything." "That's the consequence of your actions, Nathan. You chose this path when you underestimated me, when you treated me and my family with such disregard," I said firmly. The call ended with Nathan's pleas fading into a defeated silence. It was a victory, not just legally but morally and emotionally. I had stood up to the bully who had made my life miserable, and I had won. In the following weeks, Nathan's life unraveled. His attempts to control and manipulate had backfired, leaving him to face the harsh reality of his actions. His once flourishing career took a hit as the details of our divorce and his behavior became the talk of the town. As for me, I found solace in my parents' company, in the small yet comfortable home that was truly ours. I had reclaimed my life, emerging stronger and more determined. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel, free from the shadows of a loveless marriage. Sitting in the sunlit living room of the modest house that was now a sanctuary for my parents and me, I reflected on the tumultuous journey I had endured. The walls, freshly painted, seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a stark contrast to the oppressive walls of the house I once shared with Nathan. It had been several weeks since the divorce was finalized, and with each passing day, the weight of my past life lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and self-assuredness. Nathan's attempts to reach out had ceased, his once looming presence now just a distant memory. My parents, who had witnessed my transformation, were my pillars of strength. "We always knew you had this strength in you, Emily," my father said one evening, his eyes brimming with pride. I had returned to work, immersing myself in the world of law, a world where I was respected and valued for my intellect and skills. The stark contrast to my life with Nathan was both liberating and empowering, but it wasn't just about reclaiming my professional identity. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond the roles of daughter, wife, or victim. I was Emily, a woman of resilience and determination. One day as I sat in a cafe, lost in thought, a familiar face approached me. It was John, an old friend and colleague. "Emily, it's been a while. You look different, happier." His words made me realize how far I had come. I am happier, John. I've come to understand that sometimes letting go is the first step to finding yourself. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and as he left, he said, "Let's not wait another lifetime to catch up again, Emily." As I walked back home, I felt a glimmer of something new, a possibility of a future that was mine to shape. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings, for new love. But this time on my terms. The journey had been long and arduous, but as I stood in my parents' garden watching the sunset, I realized that every challenge had led me to this moment of tranquility and self-discovery. The shadows of my past had finally lifted, giving way to the warm, hopeful light of a new dawn. My name is Alexandra, and I'm a 32-year-old woman trapped in an electric nightmare of my own making. The trouble started, ironically, with something as innocent as childhood friendship. Bella and I grew up together, as close as sisters. Our bond formed in the sandbox and sealed over scraped knees and shared secrets. She was the calm to my storm, the poised figure amidst my chaotic energy. But as we grew, I watched Bella transform, like a butterfly, but into someone I barely recognized. I remember the day it changed. We were 12, sitting in my cluttered bedroom, surrounded by video games and comic books, my world. Bella, twirling a lock of her hair, said, "Alex, do you ever think about being popular? Like being one of those girls everyone admires?" I had laughed it off, but Bella hadn't. As the years rolled on, she morphed into the epitome of teenage allure. Her smile could stop boys mid-sentence, and her laugh became a siren song in the hallways of our high school. She was worshipped, and with that worship, she changed. The sweet girl I knew was replaced by someone who saw friendship as a ladder to climb, each rung a step further away from me. But even as we drifted apart, she never turned her venom on me. She'd saunter into my world, dropping her queenly facade, and ask for my advice on boys, as if we were still those little girls sharing secrets in a treehouse. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Life took us in different directions after high school. I ventured off to New York for college, embracing the chaos of the city, while Bella stayed back, reigning over our small town like a provincial queen. It wasn't until years later, after I had returned home and started dating Mark, that Bella and I truly collided again. Mark was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, kind, attentive, and with a smile that could light up the darkest of my days. I introduced him to my family with a heart full of hope, not knowing that this would be the beginning of my undoing. It was a chance encounter. Bella, as if summoned by some wicked twist of fate, appeared at my doorstep just as Mark and I were leaving. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over him. "Is this the famous Mark?" she asked, a hint of something sinister in her tone. "Yeah, this is him," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. Bella's gaze lingered on Mark a moment too long before she flashed a predatory smile. "Well, aren't you going to introduce me properly, Alex?" The unease that had started as a mere flutter in my heart grew into a storm as I watched Bella weave her web around Mark. She was a master at this game, her words honeyed and her laughs perfectly timed. Mark, bless him, was oblivious to the danger. He was just being polite. But to Bella, politeness was an invitation. A few days later, I arranged for the three of us to meet at a cafe, thinking it would put my mind at ease. How wrong I was. As Mark excused himself to the restroom, Bella leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Alex, I have to tell you something. I think I'm falling for Mark." I stared at her, the words not quite making sense. "What are you talking about, Bella?" Her eyes, dark and serious, met mine. "I can't help it. He's just so perfect." It felt like a slap in the face, a betrayal wrapped in velvet. I wanted to scream, to call her out, but the fear of losing Mark silenced me. I forced a smile, a mask to hide the crumbling world inside me. "Stop joking, Bella. That's not funny." She laughed, a sound that's once comfort, now a harbinger of my impending heartache. "Relax, Alex. I'm not going to steal your boyfriend. It's just a little crush." But as I sat there, watching her watch him, I knew it was more than a crush. Bella didn't do things by halves. She was a storm, and she was about to break everything in her path. The cafe was bustling with the usual morning crowd, a cacophony of clinking cups and casual chatter. Mark, Bella, and I found a quiet corner. I could feel the weight of Bella's gaze, heavy and unsettling, as she studied Mark with an intensity that made my skin crawl. So Mark, Alex tells me you're a doctor. That must be fascinating, Bella began, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. Mark, ever the humble, nodded. It has its moments, but it's just a job at the end of the day. Bella's laugh was a melody designed to ensnare. Just a job? Saving lives sounds more like a superhero's work to me. I watched, a silent spectator in a play I never wanted to attend. Mark was oblivious to the undercurrents, responding with polite but disinterested answers. But Bella, she was relentless. Each word, each gesture was a calculated move in her game of seduction. As the conversation drifted, I felt an increasing sense of isolation. It was as if I were a ghost at my own table, unseen and unheard. When Mark excused himself, Bella turned to me, her mask slipping slightly. "Alex, aren't you worried?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Worried about what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Bella leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "That someone might take him away from you. Someone like me." The raw honesty in her words struck me. This was no joke or playful banter. This was a declaration of war. "Bella, what has gotten into you?" "He's my boyfriend," I said, my voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. She shrugged, a predator confident in her prowess. "I can't help who I fall for, Alex. And let's be honest, you and Mark, I give it 6 months." I wanted to lash out, to scream at her for her betrayal, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I sat there paralyzed by the realization that the childhood friend I once knew was long gone. Mark returned, oblivious to the tension. As we left the cafe, Bella's parting words were a knife in my back. "Let's do this again soon. I'd love to get to know Mark better." The ride home was a silent one. Mark, unaware of the storm brewing, chatted about mundane things. But my mind was elsewhere, trapped in a whirlpool of betrayal and fear. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Bella had thrown down the gauntlet, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. She wanted a war, she would get one. But unlike her, I would play the long game. I would wait, watch, and when the time was right, I would strike. Bella may have been the queen of manipulation, but I had a few tricks up my sleeve too. In the quiet darkness of my room, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would bring Bella's world crashing down around her. It was a dangerous path, one that could destroy everything I held dear. But I was past the point of no return. Bella had made this personal, and I was going to make sure she regretted it. The days that followed were a blur of unease and suspicion. Mark, caught up in his work, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Bella, on the other hand, seemed to be everywhere, a constant, looming presence in my life. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when my fears were confirmed. Walking down the familiar streets of our town, I saw them, Bella and Mark, strolling together, lost in conversation. They looked comfortable, too comfortable, with each other. My heart pounded against my chest as I approached them, my mind racing. "Mark, Bella," I called out, my voice shaking. They turned, surprise etched on their faces. Mark's expression changed to one of concern as he saw my distress. "Alexandra, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping towards me. "Why are you two together?" The words tumbled out, a mix of accusation and disbelief. Bella's face was a mask of feigned innocence. "Oh, we just bumped into each other. Decided to catch up, you know?" Her casual dismissal of the situation fueled my anger. "Catch up, really, Bella? Or is this one of your little games?" Mark looked between us, confusion turning to realization. "Alex, is this what you think? There's nothing going on." Bella's eyes met mine, a challenge in their depths. "Why, Alexandra? Do you not trust your boyfriend? Or is it me you don't trust?" The confrontation was drawing an audience, curious onlookers pausing to witness the drama. Mark reached out, trying to calm the situation, but I shrugged him off. "Bella, I've known you my whole life. You're like a sister to me. How could you do this?" My voice broke, the weight of years of friendship crumbling under the weight of her betrayal. Bella's response was cold, calculated. "Alex, dear, it's not my fault you can't keep a man interested. Maybe if you were a little less mundane." Those words, sharp and cruel, cut deeper than any physical wound. I looked at Mark, searching for something, anything that would reassure me. But all I saw was a man caught in the crossfire, unsure of his standing. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "Mark, we're done," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mark's face crumpled, a mix of hurt and confusion. Alex, please, let's talk about this. But I was past talking. I turned to Bella, my former friend, now nothing more than a stranger. And you, Bella, enjoy the victory. I hope it was worth it. With those final words, I walked away, leaving behind the shattered pieces of what I once thought was unbreakable. The pain was raw, a gaping wound in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a burning determination. Bella had taken something precious from me, but she didn't realize the war she had started. I would rebuild, stronger and wiser, and when the time was right, Bella would know the true cost of her actions. The high school reunion was supposed to be a night of nostalgia, a chance to relive the carefree days of youth. Instead, it became a battleground. The moment I entered the decorated gymnasium, I knew I had walked into enemy territory. There she was, Bella, holding court in the center of the room, radiant and confident, basking in the admiration of our former classmates. The sight of her stirred a whirlwind of emotions within me, anger, betrayal, and a burning desire for retribution. I tried to keep a low profile, sticking to the fringes, but fate had other plans. "Hey, Alexandra, over here! Come sit with us!" called out an old classmate, waving enthusiastically. Before I could decline, I was swept up in a tide of people and deposited right next to Bella. Her smile was a masterclass in duplicity. "Alexandra, darling, it's been too long," she cooed, her eyes glinting with unspoken triumph. I forced a smile, keeping my voice even. "Yes, Bella, it's been a while." The evening wore on, a parade of small talk and reminiscing. Bella played the part of the beloved high school idol flawlessly, her every word and gesture seemingly perfect, but I knew better. Beneath that polished exterior was the heart of a viper. As the conversation shifted to life updates, I braced myself. "So, Alexandra, what's new with you? Still with Mark?" Bella asked, her voice honeyed with false concern. The question was a knife, and she wielded it expertly. "No, Bella, Mark and I are no longer together," I replied, keeping my emotions in check. Bella's expression was one of feigned shock. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I'm sure a catch like you won't be single for long." Her words were a charade, a performance for the audience we had. I could feel the eyes of our classmates on us, sensing the undercurrents of tension. "I'm focusing on myself right now, Bella. Relationships aren't a priority," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Bella laughed, a sound that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, Alex, always the independent one. But you know what they say, the clock is ticking." Her insinuation was clear, a barbed reminder of societal expectations. I felt a flush of anger but held it back. Now was not the time for an outburst. The night dragged on, a torturous affair of forced smiles and polite applause. As I lay in bed later that night, Bella's words echoed in my mind. She had taken pleasure in my pain, reveling in my discomfort. But as I closed my eyes, a plan began to form. Bella thought she had won, but the game was far from over. I would take my time crafting a revenge that would leave no doubt about who the true victor was. Bella had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and she would soon learn just how costly that mistake was. The confrontation with Bella at my parents' house was unexpected and explosive. She arrived unannounced, her face twisted in a mix of anger and desperation. "What do you want, Bella?" I asked, my voice cool as I opened the door to her furious knocking. "I want my money, Alexandra. The money you owe me," she spat, her eyes blazing. Confusion swept over me. "Money? What are you talking about? I don't owe you anything." "Don't play dumb. The $600,000 you took from Mark. You're going to pay it back." Bella's accusation was ludicrous, yet her conviction was unsettling. "Bella, you've lost your mind. I never took any money from Mark," I countered, struggling to maintain my composure in the face of her absurd claim. Her laugh was bitter, filled with contempt. "Oh, please. You think I don't know about the debts? Mark told me everything. You bled him dry with your extravagant lifestyle, and now I'm paying for it." The pieces clicked into place, a sickening realization dawning on me. Mark's financial troubles, which he had always been so vague about, were now being twisted into a weapon by Bella. "Bella, listen to yourself. You're being played. I never took any money from Mark. This is his doing, not mine." I tried to reason with her, but my words fell on deaf ears. "Save it, Alexandra. I know your type, always playing the victim. Well, not anymore. You're going to pay back every cent, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a fraud you are." Bella's threat was laced with venom, her desperation turning to malice. As she stormed off, I stood there, shaken but resolute. This was no longer just about a broken heart or a tarnished friendship. This was war. Over the next few days, I began to gather information, digging into Mark's financial history. It didn't take long to uncover a trail of deceit and manipulation. He was in deep, and he had dragged Bella down with him. Armed with this knowledge, I arranged a meeting with Bella. We met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes. She arrived, her usual confidence replaced with a wary defensiveness. "Bella, I'm not here to fight. I have something you need to see," I said, extending an envelope towards her. She took it hesitantly, her eyes scanning the documents inside. As the truth dawned on her, her face paled, the realization of Mark's betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. This can't be," she stammered, her facade crumbling. "I was never the enemy, Bella. It was Mark all along. He used us both," I said, not without a tinge of sympathy. For a moment there was a flicker of the old Bella, the friend I once knew, but it was quickly snuffed out, replaced by a hardened, bitter shell. "This changes nothing between us, Alexandra. You may not have taken the money, but you're still the reason my life is in shambles," she said, her voice cold. As she walked away, I knew that our bridge was burnt, but I also knew that justice, in its own twisted way, had been served. Bella had been humbled, her illusions shattered, and while it brought me no joy, it was a necessary closure. I walked away from the park, a sense of finality washing over me. The chapter of Bella and Mark was closed, but my story was far from over. Life has a way of coming full circle. Standing in my new home, a modest yet cozy place filled with love and laughter, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me here. I had moved on, found love again with someone who valued the simplicity of life as much as I did. We had a beautiful son, whose innocent laughter was a balm to the scars of my past. Yet the echoes of the past still lingered. News of Bella reached me, a bitter reminder of the storm we had weathered. Her fall from grace was as swift as it was severe. After the truth about Mark's deceit and her own misplaced accusations came to light, her life unraveled. The queen bee of our small town had lost her sting, her followers dissipating as quickly as they had gathered. I heard she moved into a small, run-down apartment, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle she once boasted. Her dreams of a grand wedding and a life of luxury with Mark had crumbled to dust, leaving her with a harsh dose of reality. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall. There was no satisfaction in seeing the once mighty Bella reduced to a shadow of her former self. If anything, it was a somber reminder of how fragile our perceptions of happiness can be. "Mommy, look!" My son's voice pulled me from my reverie, his small hands tugging at my skirt. In his hands he held a drawing, a crude depiction of our family. It was us, him, me, and my partner, all smiles and stick figures. "It's beautiful, honey," I said, scooping him into my arms. His laughter filled the room, a sound so pure and full of life. As I put him to bed that night, I realized that this was what true happiness looked like. It wasn't about status, money, or revenge. It was about the simple moments, the ones that often go unnoticed. Lying in bed, I thought about Bella one last time. Our friendship, once a source of comfort and joy, had become a battlefield of envy and betrayal. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the power of letting go. I hoped in time Bella would find her own path to redemption. Perhaps one day she would understand that the ordinary life she once scorned was, in fact, a life filled with extraordinary moments. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent wish for her, a wish for peace, for growth, and for the wisdom to see the beauty in life's simplicity. The story of Bella and me was over, but my story, our story, was just beginning.